Hi, my name is Billa. I'll be talking about my work on using non-target language resources to improve speech recognition performance in a target language. The motivation for this work comes about from the fact that semi-supervised training requires large amounts of unlabeled data. For many languages, unlabeled data itself is difficult to obtain. This is particularly true for languages that have limited web presence or have limited speaker populations. The question for such languages is it possible to use data, specifically unlabeled data from another language, to improve performance in the language of interest? Our approach is to apply multitask learning where the primary task is speech recognition in the target language. The secondary task is also speech recognition, but in another language with a synthetic data set. The synthetic data set here is created by generating pseudo labels for unlabeled audio in one language with a speech recognition model in another language. In this case, the labels are in a language different from the audio, but it is still a matched set for the purposes of training the speech recognition system. We illustrate the traditional semi-supervised training approach in the upper part of the slide. This is where we take labeled data, build a bootstrap model, then we use that bootstrap model to generate pseudo labels on the unlabeled data, and then combine all of this data and train a new model. This new model is typically much better than the bootstrap model that we started with. The key thing to keep in mind with traditional semi-supervised training is the unlabeled data as well as the labeled data correspond to the target language. Our proposed approach is similar, but it uses a multitask training approach where the primary task, as indicated earlier, is building a speech recognition in the target language. The secondary task is, however, ASR model training using the synthetic data set, again as described earlier. Our experimental setup is as follows. The target language is Pashto. We use the Babel training data set for training, and the IARPA material analysis dataset as a test set. For the ASR models, we have models in Arabic, Bulgarian, Tagalog, and English. The Arabic model is trained using the Gale Arabic data, which is primarily broadcast news and broadcast conversation data. For Bulgarian, we use the material build training dataset along with about 2,000 hours of YouTube data. For Tagalog, we use the Babel training data set along with YouTube data that we have downloaded about 2,000 hours as well. For English, we use the Wall Street Journal corpus as our training set. The key differences across all of these different models is the Arabic, Bulgarian, and Tagalog are what we would call well-trained models, as in they have seen quite a diverse set of data and in general are fairly general models. Whereas for English, the Wall Street Journal-based model is a fairly narrow domain model. It does not generalize that well. It is trained on a very specific corpus. For unlabeled audio, we use Bulgarian data. This is either the IARPA material built data training data set or YouTube data. Our initial results are summarized in the tables in this slide. The table on the left is a table of our baselines. The table on the right are results using our proposed approach. In terms of baselines, the very first row is our Pashto phoneme-based baseline. This is trained using the Babel training dataset without any secondary task. The second row is where we have a Pashto graphing model training as our secondary task. The remaining 4 rows are where we use the true label data for each of the respective languages as the secondary task. In all cases except for Tagalog, we see an improvement over our baseline. For Tagalog, the performance is on par with the baseline system. When we look at our proposed results from our proposed approach, where we use Bulgarian audio and then label it with speech recognition models in a different language, we see an interesting trend. For Bulgarian audio and Arabic transcripts, we see performance is better than if we had used true Bulgarian transcripts as our secondary task. This is the same case for Tagalog as well, where we see an improvement over using true Tagalog transcripts. For Bulgarian on a Wall Street Journal based labeling, we do see a degradation. This is interesting. With limited data, mismatched semi-supervised training can be useful. And in some cases, especially for Arabic and Tagalog, with Bulgarian audio, it seems that performance may be better than using the label data itself. Expanding this to a more realistic scenario, we repeat these experiments again, but now with 1,000 hours of Bulgarian YouTube data. This is 1,000 hours after speed perturbation, so this would correspond to about 333 hours of original data. The results of these experiments is summarized in the table. The very first row in the table is our baseline system. This is the same as we looked at in the slide before. The second row is in-language semi-supervised training, where we've taken 1,000 hours of posture data, also from YouTube, and trained our model with semi-supervised training. The next three rows are using the Arabic, Bulgarian, and Tagalog as so-called well-trained ASR models as a labeler on the Bulgarian audio. And the last two rows are using our POS2 baseline model as a labeler and the Wall Street Journal English system as our labeler. The takeaway from this is essentially that if you use a well-trained speech recognition model as our labeler, we essentially get the same performance as if we had done in-language semi-supervised training. The key here is a well-trained ASR model. When we use a model that has not been trained on a diverse set of data, we do not necessarily see the same behavior. The takeaway from this work is that mixed language semi-supervised training is very effective when the labeling speech recognition model is trained on a large, diverse data set. The performance we get with mixed language semi-supervised training is similar to that of in-language semi-supervised training. This is incredibly helpful when in-language unlabeled data is unavailable or difficult to obtain. When would we use this approach? Well, clearly, in the case of low-resource languages where in-language data and even unlabeled data is hard to obtain. Another perspective is to use this to build a better bootstrap model for subsequent in-language semi-supervised training. The scenario is where we are building a speech recognition system for a new language, and we have a limited initial training data set, and we haven't collected enough data to do in-language semi-supervised training. This approach provides a quick way to build a better bootstrap model so that when you do have sufficient in-language unlabeled data, you start off from a better initial model and hence improve your overall performance. That concludes my presentations. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me in the session.